The power of pause is one of the most underrated communication tools you can use in any conversation. Most people are uncomfortable with silence and rush to fill it, which means when you deliberately pause, you create space for them to keep talking and reveal more than they intended. In a courtroom, silence after a witness's statement often makes them continue speaking, giving the lawyer more valuable information. In everyday life, this works the same way. When someone says something that might be defensive or emotional, instead of jumping in right away, hold your ground and let the pause do the work. You'll notice they often soften their tone, clarify their point, or even backtrack on what they just said because the silence makes them reflect on their own words. This small but powerful trick also shifts control back to you because you are no longer reacting on their timeline. When you pause, you show that you are calm, measured, and not easily provoked. It also gives your brain time to catch up, which means you respond from a thoughtful place instead of a defensive one. Think about how many arguments escalate simply because both people are rushing to get their words in. When you pause, you create a moment where emotions can settle before you speak, which almost always leads to a better outcome. Another benefit of using pauses is that it signals confidence. People who rush to speak often sound nervous or like they are trying to prove something. People who pause seem self-assured because they are not afraid of the silence. This can make your words land with more weight when you finally speak. Imagine being in a disagreement where someone throws out a sharp comment. If you immediately fire back, it can sound like you are defensive, but if you pause, take a breath, and then respond slowly, your answer sounds more deliberate and controlled, and the other person has less ground to argue with. Pauses also help you gather more information. When you stay quiet, the other person feels compelled to fill the space and may share more than they initially planned. This is incredibly helpful if you are trying to understand their perspective or get to the root of a problem. Many people talk themselves into revealing their true feelings simply because the other person stayed quiet long enough for them to keep talking. It is a subtle way to guide the conversation without pushing or interrogating. The trick is to make the pause natural and not awkward. This is not about staring someone down or making the silence uncomfortable on purpose. It's about giving space for the conversation to breathe. You can do this by nodding slightly, maintaining a calm expression, and simply waiting. The silence becomes a tool, not a weapon, and people feel that difference. They don't feel attacked. They feel invited to share more. This is why this technique works so well in building trust, as well as diffusing tension. Practice using this in small situations first. The next time someone asks you a question, wait a couple of seconds before answering. When someone makes a point you disagree with, pause, let the air settle, and then respond. You will notice how much more in control you feel and how others seem to lean in more to hear what you are about to say. The pause is where your power is, and when you learn to use it well, you stop letting other people's words push you into quick reactions and start leading the conversation on your own terms. Asking short, precise questions is one of the most effective ways to keep control of any conversation. When you watch skilled lawyers at work, you'll notice they rarely ask long, complicated questions because long questions give the other person too much room to wander off topic. In everyday conversations, the same principle applies. If you want clarity, if you want to guide the discussion toward a useful outcome, your questions should be tight and focused. When you keep your questions simple, you make it harder for the other person to dodge, distract, or derail the point you are trying to get to. Short questions are also less emotionally charged. The longer you make a question, the more likely you are to add your emotions, assumptions, or judgments into it, which can make the other person defensive. A short question like, "What happened?" or "How did you feel about that?" invites honesty because it is clear and open. Long, complicated questions can sound like accusations. Instead of saying, "Why would you do something like that when you knew it would upset me?" you could simply ask, "What made you decide to do that?" The shorter version takes the blame and heat out of the moment and makes the person more willing to answer truthfully. Another powerful part of using short questions is that it keeps you from talking too much. Many people lose control of conversations because they explain too much or over-justify what they are asking. Short questions make you more concise and confident, and they shift the burden of talking onto the other person. In a disagreement, this can be incredibly useful because it prevents you from saying something you might regret in the heat of the moment. Instead, you are inviting the other person to explain themselves while you remain calm and measured. Short questions also work well in tense situations where you need to cut through noise and get to the truth quickly. For example, if someone is over-explaining or avoiding the point, a simple question like, "What's the main issue here?" or "What do you need from me right now?" brings the focus back where it belongs. These kinds of questions act like a compass, pointing the conversation back to what actually matters instead of letting it spiral into unrelated topics or emotional outbursts. In professional settings, this technique is a game changer because it shows that you are a clear thinker who values time and results. When you ask short, precise questions in meetings, people notice that you get to the heart of issues faster than others. This can make you seem more credible and more confident, and it often leads to quicker resolutions. People appreciate when someone asks exactly what needs to be asked without wasting words, and it sets a tone of clarity that others often follow. You can practice this skill by taking any long question you might normally ask and trimming it down to its most essential form. Challenge yourself to use no more than 6 or 7 words if possible. Instead of explaining your entire thought process, just ask the question and then stay quiet. Let the silence do the work after you ask it. This combination of short questions followed by a pause makes your communication incredibly powerful because it keeps you in control of both the direction and the pace of the conversation while giving you time to think clearly before responding. Reframing statements instead of reacting is one of the smartest ways to keep a conversation calm and productive. When someone says something that feels loaded, emotional, or even rude, the natural instinct is to react with equal energy, but that almost always makes things worse. Instead, you can take their statement, strip away the emotional charge, and repeat it back in a neutral way. This does 2 things at once. It shows that you heard them, and it slows down the heat in the conversation. When people feel heard, they stop escalating, and when the words are reframed neutrally, they become easier to address logically. This is a technique often used in courtrooms when a lawyer takes a witness's statement and rephrases it to clarify it for the jury. In everyday life, you can do the same thing. If someone says you never listened to me, instead of defending yourself right away, you can calmly say, "It sounds like you feel unheard." This removes the accusation and focuses on their feeling, which is usually what they actually want acknowledged. By reframing, you are taking control of the direction of the conversation without dismissing the other person's emotions. Reframing is also a great way to keep yourself from getting emotionally hooked. When you repeat something back in a calm and neutral tone, you create a small distance between their words and your reaction. That distance gives your brain a moment to think about the best way to respond instead of just firing back. Many arguments spin out of control simply because people respond too fast and too defensively. Reframing forces you to slow down, which protects you from saying things you don't mean and keeps the conversation from becoming a shouting match. Another benefit is that reframing often makes the other person clarify their own thoughts. Sometimes people speak in exaggerations or absolutes because they are upset, but when you reframe their statement, they realize they might not actually mean it the way they said it. For example, when someone says you always do this and you calmly say you feel like this happens often, it invites them to reflect and adjust their language. This can turn an argument into a more constructive discussion because it shifts the tone from attack to exploration. Reframing also works well in professional settings when you need to diffuse tension without creating conflict. If a coworker says this is never going to work, instead of arguing, you could say it sounds like you have concerns about this plan. This approach acknowledges their frustration but redirects the focus toward finding solutions. People feel respected when their emotions are acknowledged, and they are more likely to collaborate when they don't feel dismissed or attacked. Practicing this skill takes patience at first because the instinct to defend yourself can be strong. Start by listening carefully for the feeling or the main message behind someone's words, then repeat it back in a calmer way. Keep your tone even and your body language relaxed so that your reframe lands softly instead of sounding sarcastic or condescending. The more you practice, the easier it becomes to stay composed and turn tense moments into opportunities for connection and clarity rather than conflict and chaos. Controlling your pace and tone is one of the most powerful tools you can use to stay calm and influential in any conversation. When emotions run high, most people speed up their speech, raise their voice, and let their words come out faster than their thoughts. This not only makes them sound defensive, but also gives away their power. Slowing your pace signals confidence because it shows you are not being rushed or pressured by the situation. A measured tone helps the other person stay grounded as well, since people naturally mirror the energy they receive. When you keep your pace calm, it often forces the other person to slow down too. Think about a courtroom where a lawyer speaks deliberately and never seems to be in a hurry. That pacing commands the room's attention and gives the impression that every word matters. You can create the same effect in everyday life by being intentional about how fast you speak and how you use your voice. Instead of rushing to get your point across, take a breath, slow down, and choose your words carefully. The silence between sentences makes your words carry more weight, and people lean in to listen because they can feel the thought behind them. Your tone is just as important as your pace. The same words can sound aggressive or respectful depending on how you say them. A steady, calm tone disarms people, especially when they are expecting a heated response. If someone raises their voice, matching their energy can escalate the conflict, but keeping your tone even communicates that you are not threatened and not interested in turning the conversation into a battle. This shift often encourages the other person to come down to your level because arguing with someone who is calm feels unproductive. Another advantage of controlling your pace and tone is that it gives you time to think while you speak. People often regret what they say in emotional moments because they are thinking and talking at the same time. Slowing down gives your brain a chance to process and find the most effective way to respond. This is especially helpful in high-stakes conversations, whether it's a disagreement with a loved one, a negotiation, or an important decision-making discussion. The slower you go, the more control you have over your words, and the more likely you are to be understood the way you intend. Maintaining a measured pace also helps you stay physically calmer. When you slow your speech, your breathing slows as well, which lowers your heart rate and keeps you from feeling overwhelmed. This makes it easier to stay composed even when someone is trying to push your buttons. Your calm energy becomes contagious, and it can transform the entire tone of the interaction. People feel safer and more open to resolution when the other person isn't rushing or raising their voice. You can practice this skill by consciously pausing between sentences and lowering your volume slightly when you feel your emotions rising. Pay attention to how people respond when you slow down and speak steadily. You will notice that they often soften their own tone and start choosing their words more carefully. This is because your pace and tone set the rhythm of the conversation, and when you keep them steady, you create an environment where thoughtful, productive dialogue can happen instead of chaotic back-and-forth exchanges. Summarizing and closing the conversation is the step that makes sure nothing gets lost or left unclear. In courtrooms, lawyers end their arguments with a clear summary because they know it's the last thing the judge or jury will remember. In everyday life, you can do the same thing to make sure everyone leaves the conversation with the same understanding. People often think a conversation is over just because both sides stop talking, but without a clear summary, misunderstandings can linger. Taking a moment to restate the key points and what has been agreed on prevents confusion and shows that you are intentional about finding resolution. This is especially important in emotional conversations where feelings are running high. People often hear only part of what was said when they are upset, so summarizing brings them back to the main point. If someone expressed a concern, you can repeat it back in your own words to confirm that you understood correctly. Then you can briefly state what you will do next or what you expect moving forward. This simple step makes the other person feel heard and reassured that the discussion had a purpose. It also keeps you from leaving the conversation with assumptions that might not be accurate. Summarizing also saves you from repeating the same conversation later. How many times have disagreements dragged on for days because no one clearly stated what was decided? When you take control and summarize, you create closure in a way that prevents the issue from resurfacing unnecessarily. This is not about winning the conversation, but about tying it up neatly so both sides can move forward without resentment or confusion. The more you practice this, the more people will respect your ability to bring clarity and direction to difficult moments. Another benefit is that it gives you the final word without having to dominate or argue. Instead of leaving things open-ended, which can leave tension hanging in the air, you calmly restate what has been said and bring it to a natural end. This keeps you in control of the tone because you are deciding where the conversation stops. People often mirror this closure and feel relieved when someone takes the lead in wrapping things up. It leaves them with a sense of resolution instead of frustration. In professional settings, this technique is especially powerful. Meetings often end with vague agreements and no clear next steps, which leads to wasted time and miscommunication later. If you summarize at the end by saying, here's what we agreed on and here's what happens next, you set a clear path forward and make sure everyone is on the same page. This not only boosts efficiency, but also builds trust because people see you as someone who brings order and clarity to discussions rather than leaving them open and messy. You can practice this by making it a habit to end every important conversation with a brief recap. It does not need to be long or formal. Just take a moment to confirm what was discussed and what happens next. The act of summarizing forces both you and the other person to slow down and check for understanding before moving on. This simple habit turns casual chats, disagreements, and professional discussions into purposeful exchanges where nothing is left hanging and everyone feels clear about what just happened.